Javier.
How you doing? I like this headset.
Oh, thanks. It's a new it's part of the new 2020 accessory bag.
Like, I'm like, you sound crisp. I feel like we're on an airplane right now. Javier coming in for landing.
One, two, three.
If we haven't met yet, I am Eric Dowds, and welcome to the Cycling with Summit put on by Miles of Portraits. And today I'm extremely excited to have Javier talk about cycling for the Voiceless. And before we dive in, I just wanted to thank our Summit sponsors that make this possible, Ortlieb and Rad Power Bikes, along with our other sponsors and our Patreon supporters. And if you haven't heard about Miles of Portraits, it is a series that documents humanity 1 mile at a time. And so I do all the filming behind it. And then Annalisa, who's in the chat, she takes the photographs of people. And I think where I want to begin this interview is Javier. How did we actually meet each other in person?
Oh, that's key in person. We met in Silverton, Colorado, a year ago. Was it over a year ago? At a local event that the town had, and when I was going through Facebook, I was like an event in Silverthorne, which is really close where I live. I'm like, oh wait, didn't I follow these people on YouTube? And I started like, oh yeah, that's them. So then I just hopped on, got a ticket, and we met at that event where you talked about Miles of Portraits. So it was pretty cool. One of those things that, I was like, oh, I see you on TV, and now I see you in real life. So it was nice.
Yeah, I think it's really incredible. One, just the communities that we are able to build online, whether it's through Miles of Portraits or a lot of you know Annalise and I through the type 1 diabetes community, where a lot of connections begin online and then really do come in person. And I feel like a question sometimes we get is how do we inspire people to ride bikes? And I remember meeting you, Javier, just saying like, wow, I follow you on YouTube and you guys actually inspired me to get out. And so I was just curious, what is kind of your story about this biking?
You want me to start just from the beginning to give you?
Yeah.
Well, biking in general, I did not have a typical childhood because usually biking starts when you're young. You start playing around with bikes. For me, it started when I was 12 and I came to the States, and that's where I actually learned how to bike. Was when I was here in the United States, and I remember I was already 12. I was old enough, and I always saw it in movies. I'm like, what would it feel to ride a bike? And my mom bought us a bike, and we started old school. Just get on it and hope for the best. And after that, it was between my brother and I who we just started going in the backyard and taking some falls and just kind of help each other out. And we eventually got it. And I grew up in Summit County, Colorado, which is Breckenridge Ski Resort, to give you some idea. And the community is very, very welcoming to biking. There's a bike path that goes from Breckenridge to Frisco, and it's all over the place. So that summer that I learned how to bike, we actually biked from Breckenridge to Frisco. And we were so tired, it was like 10 miles, that we decided to take the bus back because like, oh no, we can't really make it back. But that's how I started into biking, just at a really late age in a way. Yeah.
Mm. And I know there's more to that journey, but also you just mentioned, learning how to ride a bike once you came into the US. Can you just talk about how you and your family ended up in Colorado?
Sure. Yeah. My dad was always in the States. He lived in Colorado and Oregon and Alaska, and we just got tired of being separated. That My mom, my brother, and myself decided to join my dad in Colorado. And honestly, we didn't really have a choice of where to start our lives again. It was just Summit County, and that's where we stayed. Um, it We didn't really have a choice.
Mm.
It was just a family unity, and then we've stayed ever since, and we like it.
What's what's like the bike culture like in Colorado? And one reason you're part of this summit is you're riding for the Voiceless. And so I'm interested in part like who are those voices that you now find yourself riding for?
Correct. Yeah. So just in general, Colorado is very it has a very active lifestyle across the state. Where I live in Summit County, the culture of biking is it's just part of the culture. Like I mentioned before, we have bike paths that connects different towns. You can ride all over the place. Um, and when it comes to the people who I write for, and just kind of the meaning behind it, is just for immigrants. So I grew up in a ski resort, and the ski resort can be seen as a paradise for others, and we love visitors. But it's also a place where it's well uh, founded and just it works because of the immigrant population, including myself, that live in these places, and it's often overlooked of the fact that they're not. We just this community is very overlooked um, because people go there to ski or ride bikes, so people forget about who is behind the scenes. And for me, that I couldn't really take it anymore. Um, I didn't want to be on the dark side of things anymore. And when I bike for the Voiceless, and that goes with I did a long distance bike trip that talked about immigrants in the region from Copper Mountain to Aspen, Colorado, and many of you might heard Aspen before, and that's another ski community that has the same issues that we see in Summit County. Um, and overall, even culturally, biking has and cycling themselves has had a huge impact. For example, vendors where I grew up in Mexico would ride their bikes and sell bread or milk or vegetables, and and obviously here in the United States you don't really see that often. So it's just finding those connections uh, that made it a mission for me to be, hey, it's great that we live in this great community of skiers and cyclists, but hey, there's also this community that is part of this. So can we at least recognize all these stories? And not, it's not a political statement. It's more of a sense of just stories. That's all. Because at the end of the day, um, we are a huge community, all walks of lives, and I just want people to realize that we just have to recognize that in paradise there's people who make it happen, and that's kind of why I've been writing like that for the last couple of years.
Mm. I absolutely I love that, and I know how active you are in your own community and as a leader, and of course that resonates with Miles of Portraits. It's just interesting. Once you just get into storytelling, you try to go without a filter, really. And we've heard it just in the previous talk to this with Kaisa, saying she wrote a book about her experience in Russia, and I'm escaping the name, but something like, here's the death culture. And then she goes out there and people are giving her jam, and it's like Annalise and I experienced that riding across the US and India, people going out of their way to warn us. And then you actually find the stories of warmth and resiliency and why people ride. And I know you've taken on more and more of a leadership position, and I was just wondering if you could share with us about your nonprofit work and some of the programming that you've gotten involved with.
Yeah, definitely. Uh, so part of the bike ride I'm talking about that I did from Copper to Aspen, it was mainly to raise funds for the nonprofit that I started and founded, Mountain Dreamers. That's what we called it, and it's a pro-immigration nonprofit who focuses on just bridging uh, the different stakeholders in that community to just be more welcoming and also more equity into policy making and just rules that everybody could follow, and we're kind of a bridge builder. um so obviously already started. I like to create projects and kind of move on for the next thing. So that's already a baby on the side that's growing. And now I'm focusing more into uh, being more outspoken about how can we break some of the barriers that people have when it comes to accessing the outdoors, and also that translates to some of the barriers of people how to access cycling in general. So for that, I'm starting this idea of having a gear library where people could um, get uh, a really, really low cost gear for them to go and enjoy the outdoors, regardless of immigration status, regardless of income, regardless of ability. It's just the opportunity to offer that to them. So that's kind of the next project that I'm kind of building.
Hmm. That's a beautiful mission. I think one thing I've been taking away from this summit is just how do you make people feel welcome on day one, if not before day one. It's a pretty obvious thing to say right now. The cycling industry overall represents white skinny males, and so if you don't see yourself in a space, then you might not know that you're invited to that space. And in my own way, you feel that with chronic disease at times where you're told you can't do something, so you might not ever enter it. And I was just curious, since I know you've also been paying attention to the other talks, and I also find that, there's a lot of overlapping areas. I was wondering if there's any of the other speakers or other topics that have like resonated with you in terms of like the cycling community.
Yeah, honestly, I can say all of them, to be honest, just because uh, there's people who always have barriers, and it's really nice to know that people from different walks of lives, color, um, um, health issues, um, mental problems, that that narrative has to be included in the next generation of people of cyclists, because it's not just a typical picture like you mentioned, and we talked about this of white male and skinny that who gets to enjoy this amazing sport. So it resonates to all of the stories because at the end of the day, all of us get on the bike, and a gear is a gear, and that an uphill is an uphill regardless of your circumstances. Like that, for me, this is what equity kind of talk means, because it's an even playing field, and if you see a hill, it doesn't matter your color, you're gonna go up it. uh, but obviously, like, how do we get people to have that opportunity to go up that hill, right? And I think cycling it's a great medium to make it happen, because we all have experiences, hopefully, that when you're biking, it could be a mile, it could be 100 miles, we always find this connection with a bike and just this feeling of freedom. And that's something that has to be shared with a lot of people, with everybody. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's where we have, and that's something that resonates. Like we have those physical limitations, and I thought it was really interesting. This coming off Kaiser's talk where she's a double amputee and was talking about her prosthetics just being a tool, but doesn't take away from who she is. But then we also have these talks that deal with the mental side of the sport and why people ride. And I know some one of your reasons of riding is also to deal with grief. And I was just wondering if you could talk about, how the bike has fit into that world for you.
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, when it comes to my relationship with bikes in my personal life, I've always had stages. Uh, at the end of the day, I just enjoy riding a bike just for the feeling. But when I started to realize that biking meant a lot to me, and it was something that it was the epiphany of just like, this is who I am, was when I lost my brother, because I mentioned it earlier. Um, my brother, who we learned together how to ride the bike, passed away, uh, and to me, that that took a lot of me, because, like I said, my dad was here in the United States. He was my mom, my brother, and myself. My relationship with my brother was very, very unique, and we were really close together. So when that was taken away from me, uh, my escape, obviously, honestly, for a year I was depressed. My grades suffer, my everything suffer, and instead of me um, focusing on all the negative, I started to realize that in order for me to move forward, I had to embrace his lifestyle and his well-being to make a memory of him. So I picked up the bike because that's something that we had in common, and at that moment, that's how I grieved, just by biking and going as fast or as long as I could, and kind of clear my mind. And also during that process, is a funny story. I was down in Fruta, which is Colorado, some really amazing trails, um, and it was a month after my brother passed away that I was in focus, and I also got my first stitches because I went over the handlebars. but but I find it funny because at the end of the day, um, it kind of helped me, and also kind of put in perspective that mountain biking was not really something for me anymore. So I had to go transition to cycling and road biking instead. but um, but yeah, it helped me. It helped me to escape from my own pain and translate that into pedaling one time at a time. And I think that's just a philosophy for life, right? It's just get into gear one at a time, and whatever comes your way, you're able to kind of work it out. And I think that's when biking kind of saved me, and not and it didn't allow me to go in a different path that would have been destructive because I was in a very dark place at that time.
Yeah, it reminds me of Leo Rogers, who kicked off the live interviews. He was in a motorcycle accident and lost a leg, and he talks about, it being a curse that turns into a gift. And of course, when you're dealing with those dark times, it's painful. Um, but it's like it's really been incredible just to hear people's transition into finding something as a release, as a motivation and purpose. And and I think something I also love about Leo that reminds me of you is I was asking Leo, like, who inspires you? How do you actually keep up this motivation to show up for yourself, for the bike community? And his response was, it's not one person, it's many people. And I think there's a lot of stuff that you put out on Instagram. I know specifically you're saying like just seeing a family out biking together at the market or something can be your source of inspiration and motivation. And so I was wondering if you could just share that a little bit more, especially as we try to build a more inclusive cycling community. I feel like, also saying like, here's the small moments of inspiration.
Yeah, I think it has taken a lot of me to come to this moment and realize those smaller things. Um, as a people of color, a brown individual in a very not so there's not a lot of color where I live, and also I'm a large body. It also brings layers and barriers into this inclusive cycling community, and the motivation it's has changed honestly through the years as I get older, but something has stayed constant, and that has been just the feeling that the biking gives me, um, and the motivation I get is just like you said from simple people, seeing and writing. uh, so it's it's really hard to pick up something that motivates me because at the end of the day, just seeing people active in general just makes me feel better about myself because I'm not the only one doing it. And it doesn't matter, like I say, color, size, gender. It for me just motivates me a lot, and I think that's that's based on focusing on the smaller things instead of the bigger picture. Uh, I could easily stop riding my bike because at times I've people have told me you're fat. Like, why are you riding your bike? I'm like, well, I'm not racing. So if I want to ride my bike, so be it. You're doing the same thing. You want to go fast, you can do that. I am not like that. So it's just taking the smaller things and kind of switching it into a positive light, because we do see that narrative, right? We see commercials of fit people or going amazing things, but that definition changes per individual in their own struggles. And I think when we realize that, for somebody, riding 100 miles may be their goal. For somebody else, it might be riding 5 miles. And we need to recognize the small victories that those individuals may have. So focusing on the small little things, I think, is what the main motivation for me, to be honest.
Mm. I love that. And I think it's a reminder that highlighting another story doesn't actually take away from someone else. I feel like a lot of times that kind of feels like the narrative, especially as we try to motivate each other, but also talk about brands and how they're represented. Saying, and I think about Kaylee's talk, who Kaylee talked about fat cyclists or people with larger bodies. There's a conversation of, well, should we talk about people who use cycling to lose weight? And in essence, her response was like, yes, these stories are valid, as well as the people who just use this to get stronger and get out. They're not exclusive and they don't take away from each other. And I hope that like sentiment is really felt throughout this summit of like, it's a celebration of all stories and celebration of all people just getting out and enjoying themselves, and in there, because it's also a lot of different cyclists. And you talked a little bit about Colorado having so many like niche communities. And I know I didn't fall in love with cycling until bike touring, which is a very slow way to bike. You have 60 pounds of gear, but it's also amazing because you kind of have your home on wheels. And so I know transitioning and trying different types of cycling has been part of your journey. And so I was just wondering if there might be someone listening who's like, I tried road biking, I don't like it. You mentioned mountain biking was your thing and then it wasn't your thing. Can you just talk about some of those transitions and like where you find yourself now?
Yeah, yeah. So based on the geography that I live on, right? Breckenridge I live in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. So I started with mountain biking uh, after a long run bike because it's very accessible. You literally out of my house, I get a trail and I'm already biking. Um, that not only because I'm getting older, uh, it then I transitioned to road biking, and now I'm into bike packing. So, and I still ride mountain bike and road bike and gravel. So I still do all of that. Just depends on my mood, and I think that's the that honestly that's the reality to it. Um, I still do all of that. It depends how I feel or what I want to do. I grab my different bikes or just one. The gravel bike has been amazing because I can do all of that. I can ride a trail, a path, a road, and it's amazing. So now I'm actually more into gravel biking. Uh, but like I said, something has been consistent is regardless of if it's mountain biking, road cycling, gravel biking, unicycling, whatever it is, um, we all share the same ideal, and that ideal is to get outside. And as long as we're doing that and embracing those stories like the ones I've been illustrated during this summit, and we're able to find that motivation within us and also motivate others to join, that's the future of cycling in general. We also can get into those hot topics of like, oh, you're a biker, or those labels. But I go back to the same thing. Regardless if you call me a biker or not, or a cyclist, a gear is a gear, an uphill is an uphill. You always go through that. So my point is, we have two wheels or one. Let's go out there and have some fun. That's kind of my thing.
And to truly hammer home the point of how Javier is willing to give out his gear and make sure people have gear that's accessible. When I was out in Silverthorne, I was like, I'd love to go on a hike, but I don't have hiking shoes. And Javier legitimately showed up with his hiking boots. We drove to his house to pick up jackets, and he gave me absolutely everything I need to go on a bike just while we were visiting town. And I think that's like a testament, one, to the cycling community, but two, to like the person that you are and what you're hoping to inspiring other people, and just make sure that they have some of the tools that they need, the gear that they need. And maybe just in a practical sense, if someone is looking to get into you know bike packing, is there something that helped you kind of in the beginning, or a piece of gear, or like even this research, that you're like, I think so many people have never done something, for instance, like I tell people adventure cycling has an interactive map. So you can see their whole national network and see where you might be and realize there's a bike path there. Is there is there something that, like, if someone's new to this, you're just like, here's a great place to start, or here's a piece of gear that I really loved, whether that's electronic or actual physically?
Yeah. So my first thing to that is there's no right or wrong way to do it. So if you feel that adventurous soul, literally, my first thing is if you want to spend an overnight with your bike, it's very simple. Very simple. It could be it doesn't matter where you live. Just pick up, a map. Be like, maybe that sounds like a right place to go. And you can always scope it out. But I'll say the best advice is just get up and ride. If that means take a backpack with all your gear, that could be, as simple as a jacket, sleeping bag, and depending on the weather, right? Definitely in the summer, if it's your first time, that would definitely recommend that in the summer. And always try to have a plan B, because you will never know once you're out there if you're gonna encounter any emergencies. If it's your first time, you live in the city, pick a park and go to that park and maybe spend the night if you can. Um, um, when it comes to gear, um, I always carry a bandana because it can be used for a lot of things. It could be your plate. It could be something to stop your sweat. It could help you change the tire. It doesn't matter. Bandana is always with me. Flashlight is always with me. And I'm not really, I don't like to stick with brands. So whatever works for you, just pick it and just go. Uh, for bike packing, it could be, like I said, a simple overnight and see if you like it. Some people don't, some people do. And I have a bike backpack uh, background, so out of the gear, I've been able to use it for bike packing. And nowadays there's equipment for bike packing specifically. Um, like Big Agnes is one of them. There's other companies who specialize in that. If you can afford it, go for it. But at the end of the day, just get out your stuff and go. Like it's that simple, to be honest.
Hmm. I love that simplicity, and I think it's also interesting as you dive into a lot of even the speakers here. Um, a lot of us actually don't know the really big technical aspects, and I also have biked across the country without clip-ins, and people believe that you need clip-ins for everything. And I'm like, just wear your shoes, just get out there. And something I was mentioning to you, and just as anyone's tuning in, is that, before this summit, there's an organization called Film by Bike, and they had a whole film series about people who are using bikes to get out there. And they just announced a grant recently for, I believe it's $1,000 to $2,000 specifically for the BIPOC, or people of color overall, to apply for grants to make it so there is more chances for visibility, especially in film, to tell their stories. And Javier is one of the first people I mentioned. And so I think it is really nice also just to see in the community more and more options, to specifically focus on these stories and make sure they're told. Um, but I guess to end our interview before we hear from people who are tuning in, um, you know, especially with your family maybe in mind, um, but just in a short sentence or two, but why do you ride, and what does the bike mean?
I that's a good. Let me try to summarize it. I ride for the people who haven't had the chance to ride yet. I ride for the people who have been marginalized, um, and me as an immigrant, uh, I want that to be recognized. not as a token, but as a story of perseverance. Um, as a people of color, it's not easy to break some of these barriers of accessibility. Um, and I'm fortunate that I've been able to break some of those barriers, but my work is not done because um, now I'm giving the voiceless a voice, and I'm just a simple small grain in a big pile of sand because the work is not it's not done. So in summary, uh, I bike for fun. To be honest, that's literally the bottom line.
I love that, Javier. Thank you. Thank you for that. We'll see if there's any questions, but like it legitimately is so insanely cool to think that YouTube in one way or the other brought us together. And I think something that's resonated in my life is a lot of these connections that are made online end up into friendships, into family. And so it is, I think, a powerful experience, especially as we're all dealing with the COVID pandemic. It's helped us slow down, but it's really nice to know that these relationships are real and can blossom. So thank you so much. And I guess just before closing, where can people find you, the work that you're doing? If someone is tuning in and says, I want to reach out and help more, what's the best way?
Yeah, I think Instagram is probably a good way. Just so for you to kind of keep up with some of the projects I'm doing. And then I have my tag handle on Zoom, and it's also, which means bear. My little brother used to call me also. So that's kind of symbolizing of that. And aventurero, which translates to adventurer. And I can spell it out as OSO underscore AVENTURO, and that's my handle on Instagram.
I didn't know that powerful meaning behind that. I love that now.
Yeah, that's kind of my nickname, just also.
I was like, we also see some tattoos. We can get some questions there. But Annalisa, are there any questions for Javier?
No questions yet, but while we're waiting for people, if anyone wants to drop any questions in the comments, I had a question for you, Javier.
Yeah.
You were talking about how you didn't get into bikes really until you were older, and I was wondering if you could talk about kind of your first experience or like your first views or relationship with the bike when you were growing up in Mexico, like how
Yeah.
you viewed the bike when you were living there.
So when I was growing up, I viewed it as a way of transportation only. And I think I touched on it earlier. I will see it as vendors, will use it to sell bread or milk, or just transport produce. That was my first view of biking. I did not grow up seeing the Tour de France or even knowing that there was bike races, um, or anything like that. So my first connection with biking was as a way of transportation and as a way of making a living. That was kind of my first view. Um, and the other side of biking came from movies, and I was seeing kids riding their bikes around the neighborhood. I never saw any kids around my neighborhood riding their bikes like I see now.
It's crazy how the bike can be a vehicle for so many things. Like it transformed from you seeing it as just like mainly a functional tool to something that was like helped you get through the loss of your brother. I think that's really beautiful.
Correct. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions for Javier? I'll ask another one while we're waiting. If you have like a memory of the most freeing time that you've experienced on a bike, if it was like when you were younger or just a memory from one of your bike rides.
Yeah, I think the most freeing and rewarding, it was to the trip that I got my first stitches and I went on the handlebars. Um, I still remember the name of the trail, St. Mary's Trail, and it's a very popular trail that connects to Utah. And like I said, all my life I struggle with weight in general, and I remember looking at the hill I was like, holy crap. I'm sorry. It was long. I'm like, what is this? Like, this is not fun. And just connecting with the bike and just pedaling one at a time. Before I knew I was at the top. And after that, it dropped into being a very narrow track. And then next to me was the mountain, and the other side it was the Colorado River right below me. So, so not only did I going up a really high hill, a steep hill, I was literally between mountain or river, and the most freeing time when I was just cruising down, and I just felt the wind. I felt like nothing mattered. I felt invincible. That was probably the most freeing moment in my life. And at that same time, I was grieving the loss of my brother, and it just helped me kind of have this zen moment and connect. And like I said, that was kind of like the connection that I forever hold. It was that trip.
And that's really beautiful. I think that like especially when we're working our way up a hill, it just makes the downhill so much more glorious and cathartic. And yeah, I experienced a similar thing after the loss of my mom, just like deciding to ride my bike across America a few years after her death, and just having those moments where you're just like alone with nature and you can see them in the world around you, you know?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it's powerful.
Javier, as YouTube brought us together, I was wondering if you have other YouTube channels that you enjoy following, whether specifically in the cycling community or outdoor community.
YouTube wise, I actually don't. I stopped using it. Not using it, but I haven't really been active on it. But I do like Darwin on the trail. He's a bike packer who hikes um, all the big trails in the United States, and he's big into gear, and I like gear, so I really like it. Instagram wise, I do have a couple of accounts that I like to follow. Um, I think it's Black Bikepackers is one of them. Um, what's it? I don't really remember all the names. Here, let me pull out my. Can I pull out my phone and kind of look at them? Here, let's see. There's one. It's called Nuestras Raíces Verdes, which translates to our green roots. And that one, it's a kind of like a podcast that highlights the relationship between the land um, and people, which is really amazing. Um, there's another one. I don't know. I just like to see color in my Instagram, and just abilities too. Um, there's this guy. He's African American. He's also a large body who travels around the world, and he talks about some of the issues like air travel and things like that. Uh, but at the end of the day, we all there's different accounts, even from the uh, Darwin on the Trail. It's everybody has their struggles, and I like to see how people turn the struggles into actions and how those actions are in positive positive impacts in their lives and also their community. So that's kind of what I feed off.
Well, beautiful. I love that we were able to reconnect, Javier. If no one else has any other questions, I think this was a beautiful chance to reconnect. We were laughing at some memories of us like being like, how long ago did we actually meet? You know, and it's also a good reminder because sometimes you feel like you've known people for years, even though you might have never met or you met one time. And I feel that way with you, where it's like just so nice to see each other pop up on each other's feeds or have moments like this where you're able to dive like a little bit deeper. So thank you so much for taking this time.
Appreciate the opportunity and the space, and I also appreciate everybody who joined in today to take some of the time to listen and to reconnect with the little of my life. That means a lot.
And so with that, I think we can close out and I appreciate it, Javier.
Thank you.
Eric, who makes that flannel?
This right here this is a Pearl Izumi. I have like a full. I was like, what t-shirt do I have on? This is a Pearl Izumi top with a Pearl Izumi flannel. Yeah, so I was riding around this yesterday after the interview with Leo. But what's nice about all Pearl Izumi apparel is that I'm pretty sure 100% of them have a reflective strip. So even on the back of this flannel, right around like the butt area is a reflective strip. So even on when you're commuting or hanging out, it's it makes it so you can be seen, you know. And I'm like, I haven't had this Maple Aid as well, but this is Untapped, who's one of our sponsors. So if you guys, I'm not sure if they send out what they send out to everyone that registers, but I haven't had this, but it's been in my pocket as a treat to have shortly.
Just in case.
Just in case. I was reading their blog and I was like, man, there's a lot of things here that sounds like it's Vermont stuff. And so like it ends up that the EMS service here in Vermont actually uses Untapped to treat like low blood sugars in people. And I was like, oh, that's rad, but very East Coast. Like, yeah, we have maple syrup. So our emergency squads use maple syrup.
At least it's delicious.